The first police officer who spoke to Ruth Miller on the shore of Atwood Lake in Ohio quickly realized something was terribly wrong. The woman standing in front of him was wet from the lake, but she was not panicking, crying, or asking for help. Instead, she spoke calmly and confidently about God. When officers asked what had happened, she repeated a phrase that would soon shock investigators across the country: she had given her son to God. To the officers at the scene, the situation was confusing and deeply disturbing. A mother was calmly telling them that she had thrown her child into the water, yet she spoke with the tone of someone delivering a message rather than describing a tragedy. The boy she was referring to was her 4-year-old son, Vincent Miller. As officers listened to her explanation, they realized that something far more serious had already occurred. Ruth Miller was 40 years old and part of the Amish community in Holmes County, Ohio, an area known for having one of the largest Amish populations in the United States. That morning marked the first time most of the responding officers had ever encountered her. She stood near the shoreline of Atwood Lake, speaking about faith, scripture, and what she believed was a divine command. When officers asked her to clarify what she meant by giving her son to God, she explained that she had taken the child into the water and surrendered him to God. She insisted that people would think she was crazy, but she firmly believed what she had done was part of God's will. She spoke calmly and repeated that God loved people and that his return was coming soon. The calmness in her voice was what unsettled officers the most. In situations involving missing children, parents are usually frantic, desperate, and emotional. Ruth Miller showed none of those reactions. Instead, she spoke almost like a preacher delivering a sermon. As officers continued questioning her, the situation grew even stranger. When asked about her husband, Marcus Miller, she said he had gone for a walk earlier that morning and had not returned. She then made a bizarre claim. She believed he was also in the lake and that a fish had swallowed him. She insisted that if officers searched the bottom of the lake, they would find the fish and her husband inside it. The officers tried to understand what she was saying. She described her husband's clothing clearly: tan pants, a cream-colored shirt, and flip-flops. Her memory of details appeared perfectly intact, which made her strange explanations even more unsettling. At that point, law enforcement began to suspect that the situation involved more than just the drowning of a child. There could potentially be 2 victims in the lake. Dispatch communications soon confirmed the seriousness of the situation. Officers reported that the mother had admitted to throwing her 4-year-old son into the lake. Because Vincent could not swim and had been underwater for a significant amount of time, rescuers quickly realized that the search would likely become a recovery operation rather than a rescue. While officers organized dive teams to search the water, Ruth Miller continued speaking about faith and scripture. She quoted passages from the Bible and prayed out loud near the patrol vehicle. She told officers that God would reveal the truth and that people simply needed to believe. Her statements suggested that she saw herself as someone misunderstood by others. In her mind, the people questioning her were doubters who lacked faith. She appeared convinced that what she had done would eventually be proven to be part of God's plan. Meanwhile, another disturbing detail began to emerge. The children Ruth asked about, her twin 18-year-old sons and her 15-year-old daughter, had survived a terrifying incident earlier that day. According to investigators, after Vincent had already been thrown into the lake, Ruth placed the 3 teenagers in a golf cart and deliberately drove it into the water. The teenagers managed to escape by climbing out of the sinking vehicle. Their survival meant that they were the only direct witnesses to the events that had taken place that morning. 2 separate searches were underway at the lake, one for the 4-year-old boy and another for the husband Ruth claimed was also somewhere beneath the water. Dive teams spent hours searching the area. Later that evening, at approximately 6 o'clock, they recovered the body of Vincent Miller from the lake. The discovery confirmed the worst fears of investigators and emergency responders. A young child had lost his life under horrifying circumstances. However, the case became even more tragic the following day. On August 24, search teams located the body of Marcus Miller, Ruth's husband, in the same lake. He was 45 years old and the father of the family's 4 children. His death added another devastating layer to the already shocking case. Investigators later uncovered details about what had happened during the hours before the tragedy. During the early morning hours of August 23, Ruth and Marcus had walked into the lake together. According to investigators, both of them believed they were being commanded by God to demonstrate their faith. They entered the water but eventually returned to shore. Marcus reportedly believed that he had failed to show enough faith during that attempt. Sometime later, he went back into the water alone. Tragically, he never came out. His death was later ruled an accidental drowning. Authorities determined that Marcus had not been pushed or forced into the water. Instead, investigators concluded that he had walked into the lake because of his own religious beliefs. The focus of the criminal investigation then shifted entirely toward Ruth Miller and the death of her young son. She was initially hospitalized and later arrested. A Tuscarawas County grand jury reviewed the evidence and returned a 7-count indictment against her. The most serious charge was aggravated murder related to the death of Vincent Miller, who was under 13 years old at the time of the incident. Additional charges included murder, felonious assault, and child endangerment. Prosecutors alleged that Ruth had deliberately caused the child's death and had knowingly placed her other children in danger during the incident involving the golf cart. During early court proceedings, her attorneys entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. This plea does not deny that the act occurred. Instead, it argues that the defendant was suffering from a mental condition that prevented them from understanding that their actions were wrong at the time. The court also issued strict orders preventing Ruth from contacting her surviving children. Prosecutors expressed concern that she might attempt to communicate with them from jail, which could interfere with the investigation or affect the victims. Later psychiatric evaluations determined that Ruth Miller was competent to stand trial. In legal terms, competency means that a defendant understands the charges against them and is capable of participating in their defense. However, competency does not determine whether the person was legally sane when the crime occurred. That question, whether she was legally responsible for her actions on the morning of August 23, remains one of the central issues in the case. Prosecutors have argued that her behavior after the child's death suggests deliberate decision-making rather than confusion or panic. According to investigators, she did not immediately seek help or attempt to rescue the boy. Instead, she returned to her remaining children and drove them into the lake as well. To prosecutors, that sequence of events indicates a continuation of purposeful actions rather than a sudden mental breakdown. Her defense team, however, is expected to argue that her actions were influenced by extreme religious delusions and that she genuinely believed she was following divine instructions. As of February 2026, the case had not yet reached a final verdict. Ruth Miller's murder trial was scheduled to begin on March 4, 2026, where a jury would determine whether she should be held criminally responsible for the drowning of her 4-year-old son. The trial is expected to focus heavily on psychological testimony, religious beliefs, and the question of mental state. Jurors will ultimately have to decide whether her actions were the result of criminal intent or a severe mental disorder that impaired her ability to understand reality. For the Miller family and the community around Holmes County, the tragedy has left deep emotional scars. The loss of a young child and the death of a father have created a heartbreaking situation that will likely take years for the family to process. At the center of the case remains Vincent Miller, a 4-year-old boy whose life ended in a way that continues to shock and sadden those who hear the story. His death has sparked difficult conversations about faith, mental health, and the boundaries between belief and responsibility under the law. As the legal process continues, the court will ultimately determine how the justice system should respond to one of the most disturbing cases to emerge from Ohio in recent years. This tragic case raises difficult questions about faith and responsibility, and the final answers will be decided in court. If you want to stay updated on stories like this, make sure to like and subscribe.